Hello and warm welcome. My name is Shashwadisi, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to our Nature in Our Cities webinar series, brought to you by the Azim Premji University. This webinar is part of the broader Seeking Sustainability initiative of the university. We also have another series running that is Nature Writing for Children. So, when we speak about nature, we typically talk about flora and fauna that resides in the wild. The iconic tigers, the amazing elephants, the impressive nilgai, or even the ubiquitous gharials in the Chambal River. But what we often ignore is all that nature, the bird, bees, and even the bandars that all live around us, our homes, in our cities. So this webinar series is meant to highlight that. And today we have a great opportunity to say hi to one of my favorite species, Mr. and Mrs. Frog. Ever since I had to dissect one in my biology class in the 11th standard, I have been fascinated by the frogs. Learning that their cardio system is so similar to ours, and so many other things about them. Even in the broader narratives of things like climate change, you keep hearing about the importance of frog, especially as an indicator species. And yet, the funny thing is, at one end, we keep kind of bothering about the extinction of these frogs and how what it means to us, and at the same time, we keep discovering new species of frogs all around us. In fact, there's one that has been found in Bengaluru recently, and named after the city itself, Sphaerotheca Bengaluru. So hence, we are not sure what we should feel about the frog. Should we feel sorry, scared, concerned, or just plain happy? So, to help us with that, we have an renowned researcher with us, Dr. K.V. Guru Raja, who is a faculty member of the Shrishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design, and Technology. And he's an expert on frogs with his current interest in the field of amphibian ecology. He has described 21 new species of frogs and other species, and has also been instrumental in creating a first ever app on frogs called as Find. So welcome, Dr. Guru Rajan. Yeah. And to do the honors for us, we of being our host, we have with us Kosto Brau, who is a faculty at the Azim Premji University and teaches biology at the undergrad levels. He's been an academician and associated with Rishi Valley School in the past. Thanks so much, Kosto, for taking the baton for this discussion today.
Thank you, Shashwat. I'm so happy to be here talking with Guru Raja. His enthusiasm about frogs and ecology is really infectious. Just in the brief talk we've had yesterday, it's certainly very inspiring, and I'm very happy that we can have a chat today.
Yeah.
So,
So just before I hand over the baton to you, just one quick note to all our viewers. You can type in your questions and comments in the live chat box. Towards the end of the program, we'll be kind of, Costa will be taking them up. And so without much ado, let's croak up today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashwat.
so Guru, I thought we could start with the simple question about your fascination with frogs. So, could you start with your story and how you got into this field?
Wow. So, to begin with, I wasn't a frog loving or frog interested person kind of thing, or not even thinking about frog research. But I started with bird watching. So, the high school days were really when my brother introduced me. He was from Mysore Amateur Naturalist. So he used to take me on a bicycle, my dad's bicycle, and we used to go on Sunday morning. And then very close by in my hometown in Shimoga. So Sunday morning between 7 to 11 is our bird watching sessions. And the first, perhaps the bird species that I was fascinated with was the white-throated kingfisher with the colors and all. I'm like, wow. So how do it gets into? And then slowly that has become a very what do you say? It became very habitual kind of thing. For Saturday, Sunday, I would not do anything else but first to finish off is bird watching, and then come back and have breakfast kind of thing. And that led me to take biology in my bachelor's, and then in master's I took environmental science. And it's in the master's dissertation program the switchover happened, because the same bird watching was happening in the university too, and my professor asked me whether I can do a list of species in the university campus, and I already had it, and I said there's already 40 species or so, so can I do something else? And that is when he said, why don't you do frog research? And I didn't know anything about it, and he showed me during that time we used to have something called an enamel panel in the laboratories, and he poured water into it, and then he, from the jars, he opened a couple of individuals and then said, this is Nyctipetracus, this is something else. What is this? I don't even know. And that is what I got into. But the first ever interaction with frog is also not a happy story kind of thing, because he caught one of the frog and kept it in my hand, and I, for the first time holding a frog, it's slimy, it slipped through my hand, and he was really giving a look at me. And then it took almost a month for me to really familiarize how to handle it and all. And then their eyes is the one that made me to hook onto them kind of. I was completely blown away by their eyes, the very popped out eyes and deeply looking into kind of. And that's it, that's the hook that happened in the masters. And then that journey started with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing that your story also kind of is similar to many other people's I've heard who get started with birds at a young age, but then move on to something else. So it seems like this early connection to nature seems to be very important.
Yeah.
And then, of course, people go on to do other things, but I think that connection does remain for many people.
Yeah. And the interesting point here, Kaustubh, I would like to make is that in bird watching, it has all the resources required for doing bird watching. For example, you have a handbook, you have everything there. Only required is kind of your time, and go and watch it and spend time with that, right? And after a couple of things, if you don't have a real good research question or probing further, it becomes a very repetitive kind of thing. And perhaps that is what we start looking into something else where we can have a question, probe further kind of thing. But in even the birdwatcher groups generally don't tell us what are the greater questions one can ask during doing bird watching. So that is where it starts becoming a very saturated kind of thing, and then people will start diverting themselves. But as you rightly pointed, that early engagement actually takes us to the directions that we finally find ourselves. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, maybe that's already happening because amongst the Bangalore birding groups that I see, I now notice that a lot more people are watching into watching butterflies or insects. So that's nice that they are kind of expanding into other taxa, smaller taxa, not just colorful birds.
So true.
I think it's also
So true.
happening.
Yeah. And to say that the NCF's book that has come as the book for bird educators, that is one of the fantastic thing. I feel that it should have been given to me pretty young in my age. I perhaps should have stayed back in the birds kind of thing. Anyway,
Right.
so it is slowly evolving, but these are the things that even bird watchers needs to keep in mind, that what is that apart from looking and making list, we can ask a question to take that inquisitiveness further. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then let's come to frogs. And here today, we are going to talk about frogs and their interaction with the city and frogs in urban India. And if you ask most people, they'll be like, there are hardly any frogs. What are you talking about? So can we talk about frogs in the city? What are frogs in the city doing, and where do we find them?
Absolutely. So this was this was a question even with me too. So when it all started with my PhD, because my PhD work was in the Western Ghats. So any point in the Western Ghats you go and put your hand, you are likely to get at least 25 to 30 species. That's a ballpark number kind of thing, right? And for my postdoc, I came to IISc. So suddenly I was like completely moved away from my Malnad area, the rains, the hillock kind of thing, the evergreenness, and I was in this dry, arid region, and I don't even know when it rains, when it doesn't rain, kind of thing. So the first thing I did was, even though it took a couple of years for me to switch over from the Western Ghats species to the urban thing, so it was, I think, in 2009-10, I started looking for amphibians in Bangalore. Like, what are the species at least we have? So one of the earliest document I found was from a WWF booklet on animals of Bangalore, which had mentioned, it is by Ranjit Daniels and Karthikeyan Srinivasan. So it listed about 16 species of frogs and toads in Bangalore, but it's a list. It's a list to start with, but what I didn't find was nobody else was reporting where they are seeing frogs in Bangalore, whether it is from the Lal Bagh, whether it is from the Sankey Tank, whether it is from Banerghatta or anywhere. So that part we didn't have. So that is what made me to pitch in for looking at frogs in Bangalore. As of now, we have about 18 species, and one of the key thing about Bangalore frogs and toads are that as you move away from the city center, you have more diversity. For example, if you go to Begur Tank area, you will find about 8 species over there. If you go to uh, Shivnalli near Banerghatta, you will find about 13 species over there. Similarly, if you go to the airport, and perhaps I'm one among the few scientists who has worked within the air side of an airport. So I worked in Bangalore airport on the air side. So we have about 9 species over there inside the airport. So look at, like, so you move away, the diversity increases. You move towards the center of the city, there are only hardly 2 species. One is the common toad, and perhaps the other one is the painted frog. Apart from that, you don't find many of the species in Bangalore within the city centers. So that's one of the and it's well known also that, because cities per se won't harbor the spaces that the frogs need, because once these water bodies perhaps had resource of fresh water, but now they have become all sinks of sewage. So that has reduced the frogs breeding area. You don't have a proper breeding area also. So lakes, when you see how they were made earlier, is more of just digging some portion and making it as natural as possible. But now if you go to any of the lake, uh, take an example of Sankey Tank. It has a jogger's path. It is well laid out stone concrete walls. So where do the interaction between water and land happens? Where do frog has to sit actually and breed? And above all of this, the water is just sewage. It's not treated water. So even if the frog wants to breed there and lay eggs, the eggs won't survive there. So that is what is happening with the Bangalore frogs. And this is from my last 12 13 years ago research on Bangalore frogs. And fortunately, 2020, there's a team of scientists from ZSI, Dr. Dinesh, and there's one more person from Bangalore itself, Deepak. They discovered a species of frog from Bangalore, which I had seen in the airport, and they named it as Sphaerotheca Bangalore, as Shashwat was mentioning earlier. So we, like, this is what it is. We don't even know what is in our backyard, right? So we only think about frogs is only in the Western Ghats or perhaps in the Amazon forest, kind of. So there are frogs. We need to have that eye and ears to uh, see them and view them and report them, kind of stuff.
I think at this point it might be good to just get some very basic, simple biology out of the way. Like, could you tell us what is the difference between a frog and a toad, and what is the exact kind of habitat that frogs like versus toads, um, and
Yeah,
how might
yeah.
one go about finding frogs?
Yeah. So basically, all the frogs and toads, not only them, there are two more groups. We call it as orders in our systematics, called salamanders and Sicilians. All this together are called amphibians. And then when you look at what is their distribution, what is happening with that, see, frogs and toads are perhaps across all the continents except in the Arctic regions and the sub-Saharan Africa. Apart from that, you can see them in all the continents. Whereas when you come to salamanders, which are looking like lizards but they don't have scales, the salamanders are very temperate region species. Like we have in India, there are 2 species in Darjeeling foothills, kind of thing. but most of them are in that cold belt. Whereas Sicilians are something like a very earthworm like, but they are not earthworm because Sicilians have backbone. They are again tropical in nature. So these are the major groups, right? And when it comes to frogs and toads, we call them as anurans. In fact, at the molecular level, you can't distinguish between a frog and a toad. They're all like together as anurans. For us to understand in the field, we have differentiated. Okay, frogs are slimy, whereas toads are dry. And when you touch a frog, you will feel that sliminess. Whereas when you touch a toad, you are touching as though it's a sandpaper kind of thing. And then if you look more deeply into the body structures, there's a poison gland behind the ear drum of the toads. That's called parotid gland, whereas frogs don't have it. But it doesn't mean that frogs are not poisonous. There are poisonous frogs too. And then what is quite interesting is that toads are perhaps one of the recent origin species, and they're very hydrophilic in nature, in the sense they don't need water in its liquid form. They can even adapt to conditions when it's in vapor forms, kind of. So they have those hydrophilic nature in the skin itself, so they are very adapted. You can see them in driest of the areas, kind of thing, and they are very hardy species. And that's one of the key things to look at, difference between the frogs and the toads. So if you are seeing anything in your parking lot, in the pots that you keep in your home in Bangalore, majority of the instances that will be a toad. But if you have a water body next to your home, and then there are some ponds, and then where you are looking at some slimy creatures, and they just jump into the water, and that will be frogs. And other thing is, like, toads can only hop, whereas frogs can actually leap, take a leap and jump, kind of thing. So these are minimalistic way to look into frogs and toads. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, one thing about what you said about toads now rings true for me, because when I used to teach in the school, Shashwat was mentioning, uh, on the cricket field, which is in a dry area in Chittoor district. On the
Yeah.
cricket field, there are actually these massive termite mounds, and
Yeah.
then we found these toads who would live inside the termite mounds, extremely dry, but they were living inside
Correct.
those termite mounds.
Correct. Correct.
Whereas
Correct.
there were
Absolutely.
other areas in the school where we used to have these baffle tanks, and then
Yeah.
we had these giant bullfrogs.
Yes. Yes.
But you
They
would
are
only see
frogs.
them during particular seasons. So that's
Yeah.
that's also my next question, is that I've noticed in the city that you tend to see frogs at particular seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why is it that they're more visible during particular seasons. Also, unfortunately, you tend to notice them because they have been flattened under a car wheel on the road, because I guess they're trying to cross the road. So what is it that is causing them to come out at particular seasons?
Yeah, yeah. One of the key thing to look at amphibians is that they're very seasonal. Majority of them are very seasonal, in the sense, it's also because of their physiology. Because frogs are not like us. We have body temperatures, right? We are called endotherms. That's the particular word. Or you can warm-blooded animals, kind of. Even though blood is not the issue over here in that particular sense. Whereas the frogs belong to a group called cold-blooded animals, or ectotherms, because they don't have their own body temperature. They need to depend on sun to get that warmth. Why do they need warmth? Is to digest the food, right? So what happens is that when the frog wants to call the mate, it is preferred they do it in a season when the environmental temperature is lower than the other season. So that is why they will try to breed during the rainy season. And that's one of the key reasons also. Because if you look at the temperature of a rainy season to that of the pre-rainy season, the temperature difference will be at least something like 4 to 8, 12 degrees difference will be there. It will be hot during like 30 degrees in March, April. Perhaps it will go up to 20 or 18 degrees during the rainy season. So that is one of the thing. And the second thing is also, if you see, frogs generally, not majority of them, or sorry, rather majority of them croak during the night hours, right? So that's again because the daytime temperature versus nighttime temperature, there's a difference. So each of the croak of a frog is an energy expensive phenomena. To put it simply, it's like, when do you want to jog? You will jog either in the early morning or in the late evening. Nobody will jog at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Because that will spend more energy. So for frogs also it's the same way. With each croak, they are spending energy. And already their energy is not from inside, in the sense they have to borrow it from elsewhere. So they have to eat, then croak, and for digesting something, they have to depend on sun. So with all these constraints with them, they don't want to spend the time or energy during the daytime. And that is why they prefer to spend energy during the evening hours. And that is why you also hear that frogs croak during the late evening, or it goes up to the midnight kind of stuff, right? So that's the key thing. So one is that the temperature differences, and then the hormone actually sets in with the onset of monsoon that triggers them to breed. And that is why you see frogs highly active during the monsoon period. But it doesn't mean that frogs are not there during the other period. They will be there, but it is since they are ectotherms, they just eat once and then perhaps sleep for a couple of weeks without doing anything. So for that, they don't require every day to come out and figure out where is the food kind of thing, and that helps them. It's something similar to snakes. So if they eat once, they can be there for 7 days, 8 days, 9 days without doing anything. So frogs also do the similar kind of thing in non-breeding seasons. They eat and be there for like without doing anything for a couple of weeks, and then once more they will come and eat and then go back. So that is why we don't see many times in non-breeding seasons all these frogs. So that's how their breeding phenomena happens, and that's one of the key reasons why we see frogs only during the particular period of the year, the monsoons. And in fact, if I push this conversation further, and this is perhaps people have noticed and observed and made the record from like much more before what we are talking today, in the sense they say when the frog croaks there is a rain that is going to happen, even though we have now misconstructed that entire concept and trying to say something else over here, whether it's a superstition, whether it's something belief kind of thing. What we need to figure out is that whether people were able to actually map it out, the connection between the rain and the frog croak. Because when the frog croaks, it obviously trying to croak because of the condition, right? So, and they made that connection, and then they said, perhaps like saying, when the frog croaks, there will be rainfall. But it may not be true. But we will not go get into that belief system, but we can see the relation, correlation, how it is being brought into our day-to-day life kind of thing. And there is rituals in across India. There are frog marriages. There is a frog culture in a dry part of Karnataka, Kolar and all, where kids carry pots with water to each home, a couple of frogs inside, and ask each home to add more water into it. So this happens during the dry period, and when the water is full in the pot with the frogs there, frogs start croaking, and then they release into a water body. In a way, trying to tell that when you do this, perhaps when the frogs croak, perhaps there will rain, and then all those water bodies get filled up, kind of thing. That's how it's being culturally embedded too. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I think what you're saying is basically that since people had this connection with the natural world, they had all these observations, right? Because we also we still have these calendars, right? The Kartis, where the
Correct.
flowering times of certain flowers are noticed, and then it is predicted what kind of rain you might get that year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's part of that, right? Because there are a
Correct.
range of natural phenomena that people have noticed, and
Correct. Correct. Correct.
very
Correct.
acute
Yeah.
natural historians, I think.
Absolutely. Like, so one of the research that I was trying to see was there is a frog hymn in Rigveda, which is
Yes,
about
that's
10
right.
shlokas related to frogs.
That's right. Yeah.
Even though we need not have to get into the philosophy or religious aspect over here, but what I want to see is that there is a text that has observed what kind of colors are there, what kind of, like, the rough translation says that one bleats like a goat, one bellows like a cow, one is green and other one is yellow. So look at how people were observative at that point in time, whatever the year of writing kind of thing. We need not have to get in there, but I'm saying there were observations and the recording kind of thing. And perhaps they try to interpret in a different way, try to say, oh, this is what frogs will croak in unison and this is what happens kind of thing.
Yes.
Right? So there is a cultural embeddedness of these phenomenon and these observations of diversity. It was there culturally, is what I'm trying to convey, right?
No,
Somewhere, I
absolutely.
don't know, somewhere on this track we forgotten how to keep that record, or even to write down it in some sense. Because when I asked my grandfather or my father, the first reaction is, oh, we used to hear a lot of frogs. Like for me, the lot doesn't make any sense, because I,
Yeah.
again, my training is in science, and what do you mean by lot? Is it 10? Is it 100? So somewhere you should have written it down, no? So that we could have made a comparison kind of thing. So that is where it will lead to. Perhaps many people, when they start watching it, this will lead to writing down, okay, I have seen 10 frogs in Lalbagh. Sorry. So that will add up over a period of time. So 10 years down the line, when people have reported so many individuals and then suddenly you're not seeing frogs, that's an indication something is happening there, right? So
Absolutely.
we need to bridge that, the cultural embeddedness as well as the scientific acumen to work towards what we are observing. Yeah.
But then maybe now is a good time to talk about, the involvement of citizens as scientists in the natural world. And I think you and I both know. I mean, I have friends who are passionate about frogs, who go frogging, and I think you also know certain people who just on their own steam are doing work in looking at frogs and what is the state of frogs. So, could you share some of those stories? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So again, initially when I started my PhD, I was thinking that I am the only frog scientist in the world who is going to do a path-breaking research kind of thing. That's the typical way we all think about. But within 1 month of my PhD, I realized that frog conservation, or at least even understanding ecology of frog, is not one man's job. It's not possible. It's so vast, we know so little, so it has to be a community effort kind of thing. So and from then itself, I was thinking of, whenever I go into the field, what is the way to talk with somebody and say, what do you know about frogs? What is that you are observing in your area when you see some of the frogs? I was not interested in looking at what is the species. I was trying to understand what kind of stories they have, what kind of narratives they have with them, so that it helps me also, and they need not have to see me as somebody, an outsider who will come here for 1 week of research and then he disappears, he will publish something we don't even know what it is. So I wanted to engage with that. And more so it happened in Katlekan area in Uttar Kannada district, where I used to carry my laptop and like go to the field, do my research, come back, have food, discuss, and stop there kind of. So one day I felt, okay, let me just open up. Let me just have a conversation about what I am doing and how it is going through and all. And then I realized a couple of people saying that, oh, have you heard about a crab whistling? And I felt, oh, is it? And then I played the recording that I made on that particular night. And I showed them, is this visual of what crab you are talking about is similar to this? They said, yes, it is. And I showed them the frog. They say, oh, is it a frog? So there is a gap there also. It's not that all the traditional knowledge people have all the understanding kind of. There is somewhere we need to pitch in ourselves to understand how they know about it kind of. And similar kind of stuff happened, which is one of the famous stories I keep telling everywhere, is with the forest guard at that point in time in 2008, called Chandrakant Turkapanaik. He used to come with me because we had a project in Dandeli Tiger Reserve. Now it is Kali Tiger Reserve. So he used to come with us, and every time the same question, like, what is the species? What is the species kind of thing. I refuse to tell names. I have this inherent problem of not telling names. I want them to figure out the names kind of. And it went on for a couple of years. And in 2015, it was a time for him to pay back kind of stuff, perhaps. So he took out his old phone where he had recorded a frog call and asked me to identify the frog, and saying, Guru, you had told me so many species. Now, can you identify this species? I listened to it, and it was just like a white-throated kingfisher. And I told him on face. And we were a group of friends with Sheshadri, Ramya, and all. We went to his home actually. And then he said, no, this is not a white-throated kingfisher. It is in fact a frog. And now I was at the receiving end kind of thing. And I said, no, do you have a video? Can we just play it and see? And then said, right now I don't have, but I will share it with you. And then he shared, and that was again for the first time I'm seeing a frog which is croaking like a white-throated kingfisher. But the story doesn't end there. It moved beyond, and when we did a proper molecular analysis and morphometric kind of thing, it turned out to be a new species. And what we also did was we said that we are going to name this species not based on scientific nomenclature, in the sense it's based on scientific nomenclature, but not Latinizing a name kind of thing. Instead of, we kept the name as such. Like we said, it is Euphlyctis caravali, caravali skittering frog. So that also made the connect, because when majority of the cases when we talk about a species name, it is in Latin, both genus and species name, and people generally don't connect. And when you say, instead of that, you say, oh, Nodi, Karavali Chimmo Kappe or Karavali skittering frog, people get connected to that very easily. So these are some of the aspects we try to bring it in. And then C.R. Naik was part of our description. He was one of the authors in the paper. So we ensured that whoever is really interested in, they can actually push themselves and ask really good questions. So that is one story of C.R. Naik. In similar way, there is another guy from the department, because I'm telling about two department guys, so that for them the lab is their backyard. They need not have to go for the permission like how we apply for permission. They have
Right.
the space with them, right? So this other guy is Ramesh Badigar, and he is again a very inquisitive guy about looking at everything. So one day we met, and I said, there is a Malabar tree toad in your area. Try to figure out what is happening. So he got into that so much so that if you skim through his journal that he has maintained, it's all drawn, hand drawn, and he has developmental stages mapped about this particular frog. When it lays eggs, what is the cell division that happens, when the forelimb comes, when the hind limb comes. It's a fantastic natural history data that one can look into. And now I have told him, like, you have this material, and it can be publishable material kind of thing. Push yourself to publish it. So if you need any help, I will be able to help it out. And similarly, there is another person who is completely away from forest department. He's just a photographer and an agriculturist, called Gopal Krishna Bare. So he happened to work on the bullfrog. So I told him that bullfrogs do change the color during the monsoon. So this 2021 in May month, sorry about this. So we had Taukte hitting the western coast. So he informed me that there are yellow bullfrogs already croaking. I said, just go ahead, observe them, report it, what is going to happen. So he did all those observations, and Taukte went off, and there was a dry spell of 2 weeks. So there is nothing over there. So all the eggs, perhaps whatever is laid, is all dead. So I said, this is what needs to be documented. Right now, you know when the bullfrog is going to breed and how many days it is actually preponed the breeding period, right? Because of the change or because of something else that has come, which is not natural rainy days, right? So these are a couple of things where people themselves pitched in and then took it a lead and pushed themselves, and then they moved beyond just reporting species instead of looking at the natural history. Perhaps some people are looking into the taxonomy. Some might even join for phylogenetic analysis kind of thing. So it all depends on the personal interest, motivation, and then start looking into these deeper questions and engagement kind of stuff. So in Bangalore, what I'm trying to also do is, again, these frog walks whenever I want to conduct, it is not just about listing the species. Can we ask questions whether these some 200 odd lakes were known from Bangalore? Now it's only 80 which is remaining. If we have one species across all these 80 water bodies, can we map their population, how their populations were connected? Right? In one way, you know how species were moving. In another way, you can also know what happened to these water bodies, whether these water bodies were connected in one point in time or not, or what is the kind of barrier that we have now created so that there's no translocation or population exchange that is happening between the frogs. So these are the things one can really look into if you start looking at working on frog world, even in Bangalore.
Thanks. Those are some fantastic stories that you had. Uh, but then, if we were to ask, about frogs in Bangalore, uh, how can we look at frogs in Bangalore? Like, how are we and frogs connected? Like, in this kind of giant web of life, uh, how are
Wow.
we affecting each other? And what is
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So from the evolutionary perspective, still, we are just 2 lakh years old, whereas frogs are 360 million years old. Like that is 360 followed by 6 zeros. We are 2 followed by
Wow,
5
yeah,
zeros.
that's amazing. We are late
Right?
entrants. Late entrants on the thing. Yeah.
Yes. So that's the fundamental thing one needs to look into. So what we are done from 2 lakh years to the one which was there from 360 million years ago, right? And the other things will then start emerging automatically. So what are those the day-to-day kind of interaction we have with? So frogs are known for natural pest control, this kind of thing. So there are these common toads which feed on the termites, or painted Sri Lankan painted frog we have. They also feed on termites. So when that's one example of feeding on an insect. So even if you have 10-15 termites in your home, what kind of things they can harm your wood, furniture, books, all those stuff. So there is a natural uh, uh, species control, like the pest control kind of thing, that can be seen in frogs world. And in fact, they are called the conveyor belt of the energy, because whatever energy stored from the autotrophs that gets into the insect, from the insect world, it moves to the next trophic level through majority is through frogs, because they act as a big conveyor belt that can
I
transform
see.
one energy level to the next energy level kind of thing. In addition to that, if you are specifically looking at what is the use of frogs, there are many. So pharmaceutical uses are, the last one was in 2017, which is from the Western Ghats species only, called Hydrophilus bohuvistara. This is called a fungoid frog, and there is a chemical compound on the skin, and all the frogs have it. It's called antimicrobial peptides. So this particular antimicrobial peptide works against the H1N1 virus, and this antimicrobial peptide is called urmin. Now, so if you look at entire India, we have about 467 species of amphibians, of which 40 Sicilians, 2 are salamanders. Even 400 species, each one is a potential storehouse of antimicrobial peptides. And what this can help in terms of pharmacology, we have no clue of it, right? I don't know. COVID can also be looked into from this perspective, and looking into this perspective doesn't mean that you have to go and catch a frog and kill the frog to get the antimicrobial peptides. There are ways in which you trigger electric pulses into their skin so that they release the chemical. You bring back that chemical, not the frog. You just take the swab, bring back, run spectrograph, and figure out what are the elements hidden in that, and then you can synthetically prepare all those things, right? So this is at the level of complete utilitarian perspective of what frogs can help us with, right? So if you start looking into it, this is what it can say. And other level, what we can also think about is something called soundscape acoustics. For example, we do this with the bird species. For example, there are number of bird species. What when they croak and like when they call, we record it, and then they say, okay, this is the season where the particular species comes, and this is what has changed. It can be done similarly with the frogs. So if you have small devices, even with your smartphones, if you can record every day 2 minutes of record between 6:30 to 7, or between 7 to 7:30, 2 minutes of record every day, perhaps from June to September, it will have its own information hidden in it, and then you can figure out what are the species that were croaking in your nearby your home, right? And figure out those species first, and then perhaps you can also see what you might have missed out if you do it for next 10-15 years of that kind of data collection. So these are all the kind of possibilities in which you can see how we are connected with the frog world. The majority of the thing is they are the great pest controllers. So if frogs are not there, there were a couple of posters that as Vancouver Museum has shared. your kitchen is full of insects, your bed is full of bugs, kind of thing. So that's one of the great example. If you see frogs going extinct, this is what perhaps will happen to you. So insect control is the major thing by the frog world. Yeah.
No, that's a great thing you said, because I didn't know that this thing about the conveyor belt and how they are moving energy resources from one level to the next. Because I'm guessing, unfortunately, frogs serve as foods for many things. I know
Yeah,
many,
yeah, yeah,
many froggers who don't like snakes for that
yeah,
reason. But
yeah, yeah,
I guess they are the food base for many
yeah.
snake and bird species and other things also, smaller
Correct.
mammal species also, I'm guessing,
Including us. So
including us. Right.
in many part of India, for that matter, like before 1984, frog legs used to, like from the bullfrog, the leg used to go to France, because it's a delicacy. It's called jumping chicken. So post 1984, it's being banned, but still in some part of Goa, some part of Kerala, it's still being served on the plate, and you can still get it. This is one kind of story, but if you look at Northeast India, there are places in Sikkim, there are places in Assam, which is part of the culture. So every monsoon, when the frogs breed, they either collect the tadpoles or the adults themselves, and it's given in the market, like for it's like I'm okay with cultural practices, but when you over harvest it, that is when the challenge comes into the mind. Even for that matter, the Nasica batrachus, the pig-nosed frog in Kerala, it's one of the tribal community actually harvest the tadpoles, because tadpoles have a suckers and they will climb onto the rock surfaces. They collect it. So there's nothing wrong in doing that, because it's a kind of bushmeat kind of stuff that you are going to get. But if we are done at the commercial level, or if, let us say, when we were 100 people, when how much you used to eat, to when we have become 1,000, how much we are going to eat. So that kind of understanding, if one can get, then we can really balance between the cultural practice of how much we can eat and what cannot be done, kind of stuff.
You mentioned this pig-nosed frog. Could you just tell us for 2 minutes? I know it's a very unique species, so could
Yeah,
you talk a
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
about it? Uh,
Oh, okay, okay. So pig-nosed frog has something similar to what we call, where is our origin, whether we origin from the African Bushman or somebody else, kind of thing. So if you look at Indian frogs, all the Indian frogs, there are three hypotheses that we have. One is that some of the frogs lived on the Indian subcontinent from the beginning. Some of the frogs have moved away from India and jumped into the Eurasian plate. And some of the frogs have come from Eurasian plate into India. So there are three concepts. The concept that the pig-nosed frog brings us is called biotic ferry model. That means uh, this frog stayed in Indian subcontinent for long, many years. So when we were all together in the Gondwana landmass, that the India, Madagascar, Australia, and Africa, we are all together. This particular pig-nosed frog has its relatives in the Seychelles Islands, to that of Madagascar, and then go to the main land of Africa. So when it has moved, it stayed alone. And if you also look at its molecular time clock, it is now about 60 to 80 million years old species. So what we say is that this is called biotic ferry. It's like a ship on its own journey, and one species stayed in this ship, and it didn't change itself, it didn't modify itself, but it stayed. So that is that is the story of Nasica batrachus. But when you trace back who is their relatives, their close relatives are in the Seychelles Islands, called zooglossid members. But frogs cannot actually travel on the salt water because they don't have any scales to protect themselves. So it couldn't have happened just by swimming across the seas. It must have happened when we were all together. That is perhaps 100 years ago, right? So that's the story of pig-nosed frog. And what the natural history of the frog is much more interesting, because this particular frog only comes 8 to 15 days in a year from the ground below. Sorry about this, just a minute. So the pig-nosed frogs just come for among 365 days, 8 or 15 days in a year come, breed, they lay profusely large number of eggs, and then again they disappear. So what happens, how they stay below the ground for long, why it was not known to us from the beginning, because it was discovered in 2003, and it became a big news because it appeared on Nature. And this was one frog family that brought the entire focus of Indian amphibians on that particular species, right? It's a single species earlier, now it is two species from one family, and has a history of about 60 to 80 million years. And that's the story of pig-nosed frogs. Sorry, my throat is really bad.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, I really also enjoy. I mean, I've never seen one in the wild. I'm really hoping, but like you said, they come out for like 2 weeks and then disappear. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
good to see them.
yeah,
Here, again, I also wanted to talk about other means of kind of connecting with frogs. For instance, I noticed that you are wearing a very interesting pin on your shirt,
yes,
and
yes, yes.
I know that you have a collection of many items and artifacts related to frogs.
Yeah,
So, could we talk about how people have tried to bring frogs alive to children and other people, just ordinary people who have an interest?
yeah, yeah, definitely. So uh, uh, for me, becoming frog is an important thing, in the sense, how do you connect, right? Rather than seeing it as an organism for research purpose, or seeing as a organism on which we can all ask the question, it's better, can we see it from the frog's perspective? Can we ourselves become frog, right? And if that shift happens, I think then we can start looking at frog in a much different way. You don't feel eeks about it, you don't feel slimy about them, you start wondering about where they are, why they are sitting like that, why they are croaking in this particular kind of time in the season, kind of stuff. So uh, it can be done in multiple ways. Since I am in now Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology, I also know there are people who make toys, tell stories, build narratives, build illustrations. So a couple of books are also here, like some of these books which are worth going into, right? And some of these are,
And we'll try and put them in the, yeah, if we can get the
sure,
name,
sure,
we'll put them in the chat. Yeah.
sure. So just to showcase, like, there are ways in which you can engage with. And generally what I do when I do a frog walk is to have a origami sessions in the beginning, in the sense, we'll start folding a frog first. When you make a frog, then you know each of the part of the frog, right? And then you will feel that's the frog. And we'll also try to make how long one's frog can jump. It's a kind of frog race of our own frogs, and you can also decorate on their back. You can also make many things out of it. You can color them, you can draw things, you can draw their fingers and all. So in a way, you need not have to really catch a frog to understand a frog. What you need to do is how you engage with that, and how long you can observe a frog. So the more you engage with it, it will start revealing you much more about its habitats, its behavior, perhaps its own story. So that's how it will be. People use different materials to make frogs. There are, like, these are the metals, and then the threads are woven around it. There are frogs which are ornamental kind of thing. There are metal frogs, there are glass made frogs, there are even wax frogs. So you start seeing it, you can start building in many. So even the terracotta, clay, puppetry, uh, there are many ways in which frogs can be brought into our daily life.
Yeah, amazing. I think, yeah, it'll be great if some of these ideas, like other biology teachers can use them to get engaged with this particular group of organisms through these means. I mean, some of the ideas that you've spoken about are quite interesting. I hope teachers who might be listening try and employ some of these ideas of ways and means of looking at things rather than just naming it and moving on. You know, that also I find very problematic, how
Yeah,
we tend to do that
yeah,
about things. So one question I had now was like, what's next? Like, what should we be doing in order to kind of conserve or
Yeah.
uh, species or
Yeah.
protect them? What are some steps we
Correct.
could be
Correct.
taking even within the city?
Correct, correct. So I will go back to the question that or the comment that Shashwat was making. So at one side, India is discovering so many species, and at the other side, the globe is saying that amphibians are declining. So where to look for, and whether we really need to do any conservation. So when it comes to the conservation issues, we have in India about 460 plus species of the 8,700 species of the world over. What happens is when you just look at the diversity, it's the last 20 years we have discovered about 220 plus species, about 10 species per year, kind of at that rate. So don't we have to do any conservation because we are discovering more? Does it mean that all are safe? No, that's not the case. So if you start looking at the ecological status of all these 460 some odd species, you can see that it's only less than 40% of them have been documented, whether they are endangered, critically endangered, vulnerable, threatened, or not threatened, kind of thing. So, remaining more than 60% of the species, we don't have any clue. It is just after the discovery that's where it has ended. We don't know whether in the nature itself there is more population, where they are breeding, what is the habitat in which they are breeding, is that habitat properly maintained, or is there any threat for those habitat? We have no idea. So this is when the challenge of conservation comes into the picture. So what happened earlier, one of the work by David Bickford in the Indonesian part, is that when the assessment, IUCN assessment happened on the species which were not happened earlier, all those species turned out to be an endangered or critically endangered species. So in India, as of now, you have about 20 species which are critically endangered, 35 which are endangered, kind of. Now imagine the remaining 60% of the species when we assess, and if they sit on this critically endangered and endangered, our scenario completely shifts. We need not have to boast about our discoveries. Now we really have to worry about what is happening with these species, what is happening to their ecology. And for that, handful of number of scientists are not enough, right? It is not just with Guru, or it's not with just people who are there in Delhi University like Biju or somebody somewhere else. It is about all of us working as a community to figure out. And it also need not have to focus only about the Western Ghats or Northeast India where it's species diverse. It can also happen at your own area, like let us say in Bangalore. Do we have an idea where the species are? Are we monitoring them? Are we actually at least okay? If somebody is not interested in looking at their ecology, are you at least making a list of species what you see and reporting it at a regular interval? So if you want to report it, where you are going to report it? Is it that you are going to put it in your own email or on the Facebook? So that is where we started a program with India Biodiversity Portal in 2014, and that is when we with MetaString we started it as Frog Watch. So in within India Biodiversity Portal, it is under Creative Commons licensing. It is called Frog Watch. People who are really interested can post a picture, and this information will be in your name. You need not have to worry that all this data that you have given is taken away by somebody and somebody else will publish. If you are publishing, we will have to cite your work, right? So it is under Creative Commons licensing, so you can post it there. It is like a repository. So if you don't know the species name, there are people who will come back to you and say, this is what the species looks like, right? So that kind of conversation can also happen. So what you can do is make use of your smartphones. Either you can record the sound next to your home during the monsoon and record a frog call for 2 minutes, kind of thing, and post it on the India Biodiversity Portal. Or you can take a picture and say that, oh, this is the species I have seen next to a home. This is what I am observing, kind of thing. So how does it help in conservation? So let us imagine, so hundreds of you doing this for next 5 years. Can you imagine the amount of data that you guys are actually populating? And then when you look at that data, then you can make out what is the species, whether the species is actually an endangered, or it is nothing is happening with it, its population is okay. Before I end, I give an example of this citizen science initiative, and then perhaps I'll end also. In the sense, when we started with Malabar, mapping the Malabar Tree Toad project, which is based on the citizen science initiative, this particular species was described way back in 1875 by Gunther. And after that, 105 years, nobody knew where the species is. In 1980, after 105 years, it was Pillai who said one more species was seen from Ponmudi in Kerala. So that's only two report. Because Gunther said it's from Malabar. We don't know what Malabar is because it's a British time. It can be from Mangalore till end of the Kerala. It's all called Malabar. So now you have one report, point report, that is from Ponmudi. And till 2004, there were only four reports. Four reports. Now, after 2014, when we launched it as Mapping Malabar Tree Toad, now we have 192 records of the species from people. It's not by just by Guru or somebody. It's all those who are there in the ghats, who are photographers, who are just going there, taking some picture. They all are posting. So with this 192 observation, what has happened is Malabar tree toad, which was considered as an endangered species, is perhaps going to be delisted, and it is going to become a common species or like a vulnerable species kind of thing, right? So it's all because of people's participation. So when people put all this information, it becomes easier for us to understand how it is, how many are there, and then you can understand the ecology of it. So with that, I think I end my session with the citizen science issues. Yeah.
Great. We have some questions actually from people who are watching it. Maybe I can just read it out.
Yeah, please.
Uh, does the disappearing lakes of Bangalore have an effect on frog sustenance, or has nature found a way for their survival?
Wonderful question. So all these things will go back to the baseline information. What is that we have with us? Do we even have a report on that? In the sense, which lake has what kind of species? So if we have it, then perhaps we will be able to. But one of the logical answer is that frogs will not be able to find it because they are very slow movers. They cannot simply, like tigers, they can't say, oh, there is a fire and I can run this direction kind of thing. That level of movement is not there in the frog world. So if a lake is going to go, it is going to kill the population of that entire lake, whatever species was there, right? They perhaps will move slowly. If it is a rainy day, perhaps those tadpole will move from one lake to the other, and that can help them survive. Otherwise, if the lake is polluted, there is no possibility these frogs can survive there. The other way of looking at it is, even if the species is surviving, it is perhaps one of the most common and hardy species, what we call, which is one of the commonest species, can be thriving in all these lakes, but it is not those very unique or specialist kind of species that can thrive, because they are very sensitive to certain changes in the water chemistry. So if that happens, frogs cannot lay their eggs, and the eggs cannot survive, and if they cannot survive, there is no population. So change of lakes or changing in the landscape is definitely going to influence on the frog populations.
There's one more. Back in the olden days, we had so many frogs, they were common. I've seen frog marriages for rains, but now we don't see them as much, especially in North India. They seem to have disappeared. I think it's a comment.
Yeah.
What you were saying.
Yeah.
Frog marriages.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one more. I think the year before last, a couple of frogs in my state were publicly wed to ensure good rainfall, but then it became too much and there were calls to get them divorced.
Yeah. It was taken to the other level. Yeah.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, frog marriages, I was telling them the same. See, how we have to pitch in is that at least you guys are getting frogs this season. Be thankful for those water bodies. So if you're going to remove those water bodies, you don't even get any into frogs in the next season. So better is to conserve those water bodies. So we need to shift our way of interacting with people who are really like culturally bringing the frog marriages into the perspective. Otherwise, it becomes a conflict. We can't stay in conflict for long. You need to cooperate and move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a comment here from Antara Das. There are traffic signs in Germany that warn drivers about frogs crossing roads within certain time of the day. Wow, I did not know that. Amazing.
Yeah, I also, yeah. But in India, if you know that in the Ghats there is a frog called Bicolor Frog, and
Yes.
in fact they actually emerge in millions together. In the sense, it's not hundred or thousand kind of, it will be millions. So when they emerge, and emerge in the sense they were tadpoles, they metamorphose into adults in a particular season, and when they move, and if there are bright lights, they the frogs are very sensitive to lights, so they get stunned, so they won't move. So what happens is all these vehicles will run over. In some instances, you will see that the entire road is filled with the mat of frogs carcass kind of.
Right.
That's a tragedy. We
Yeah.
still don't appreciate frogs like that level.
And very beautiful frogs, no? Bicolored frogs.
Yes,
There's also
yes,
another
absolutely.
comment from Karthikeyan Srinivasan. Didn't know that a new species of frog has been discovered from Bangalore. It joins a species of fish and a species of ant that were described from
Yes,
Bangalore. A lot of learning as always. Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize
absolutely.
there were species of ants.
As yes, yes, yes.
Bangalore. Okay. So Bangalore is on the map in
And
terms
I
of.
was mentioning about Karthik only. That's his book of the listing of 16 species of frogs and toads in Bharat.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Karthik.
One more comment from Vijayata. In the book
Yeah.
Sixth Extinction, Elizabeth Goldberg talks about a frog bank in Panama. Do we need something similar in India? Do we have one?
Uh, Perhaps we don't require any of those things as long as we can keep the frog habitat as such. So one point in that direction, what I try to do is called batrachariums, where I tell people that if you have a small space and you know there are frogs, you just keep it, call it as batracharium. You need not have to change, you need not have to bring any board signages kind of thing. You just say it is a batracharium. You know what kind of species are there, and if anybody visits, you tell them this is the time to visit so you can see that frog. In a way, your habitat is conserved, you have given a tag kind of thing, so that it keeps it in that sanity, rather than changing and bringing and putting in an aquarium and trying to multiply them in like animal husbandry kind of thing. This in situ way of doing thing is what I appreciate most. But there are instances where people say that if the population, viable population, has come down drastically, it is better to do an animal husbandry and breed them artificially. For any of those things, we need to have baseline information. How many are there in the wild? Are we really losing them? So that will, if we are able to do that, then perhaps we'll decide on what species to be in animal husbandry and captive breeding kind of thing, and versus what need not be taken. So as far as my understanding goes, at least 80% of Indian species can be there in the field. In situ conservation is the best way forward.
Yeah, because I always have a question of if you do breed them, where are they going to go? I mean, there's no
Yeah.
habitat for them to go
Yes,
to.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Shikha Sharma asks, what has been the impact of climate change on frogs in urban Indian cities?
I have no clue. This is a fantastic question. I think Shika, you should take it up, and perhaps you should also work and see what is happening, because we don't know anything as of now. Even among cities, I think it's only 4 or 5 cities where amphibians have been documented. Bangalore is one, Pune is the other one. Somewhere in UP, there's one city, I've forgotten which is that city. In Kerala, there are a couple. So that's all we know. Mysore, I think there is a book that they are going to bring, and Manipal, yeah, Manipal is another one where they have listed the species. Otherwise, city-wise, there are no reports. So when you don't have that baseline information, you don't know what is happening. Even list is not sufficient. So baseline information, in the sense, you need to know, you need to have a quantifiable information on which you base your questions, like what is happening to their numbers, what is happening to the population, what is happening to the species, right? Yeah. So it's a fantastic question. One should actually look into it. It's it's even in Antarctica. They say that like the last one that is being discovered was the bridge between South America and the Antarctic border. They found a fossil over there, right? So that is why they are saying it's across all the continents. Only in Arctic region they don't have. And you see, there are some.
I think the question is about how do they survive in places like
Correct, correct,
Russia?
correct. I'm coming to that. So there are a
Yeah.
couple of species. Like there is one species you can also look into the YouTube. It's called Rana Silvatica, the wood frog. So these frogs actually freeze themselves. So what happens is with the touch of the snowflakes, with first touch of the snowflakes, they start freezing themselves. There will not be any movement, not even the heartbeat. So all the glycogen content is converted into glucose and sent to all the cells, and that is how the cells won't burst. Otherwise, if you are there in the cold for long, you have frostbite or cells breaking up, right? So in these frogs, they will change the glycogen into glucose and ensure that the amount of water is reduced, but the glucose is more kind of, so that they can stay as such without even heartbeat. But when you thwart them, they will jump back into life, and people are looking at what is actually happening over there. You can look into these YouTube videos. There's wonderful research that's happening with it's these cryo behaviors of the frogs, right? It's called freeze tolerance in frogs, so you can look into that, right? But in India, we don't know. Again, I don't know about the species, what they are, because we have one high altitude toad which is available in Sikkim areas. It's about, I think, 4,000 plus meters. So that is in really very cold climate. And what it does, how it survives, we have no clue. Perhaps somebody working on the natural history of it would be a great way to look into these things. Yeah.
More questions. Sushila asks, can you tell us about some of the interesting frog species in India? Saw the dancing frog in Wild Karnataka movie.
Yeah.
The flagging. About a few more. Also, are there poisonous frogs in India?
So wonderful questions, Sushila. So, dancing frog is one of my favorite research work I'm doing in collaboration with University of Vienna and Brown University. So we are trying to see why do they do the kind of dancing. So earlier, there were works from Borneo. There's a Storus parvus which do in the background noise. They do the dancing. We call it dancing. It's not exactly the dancing that one can relate with the human beings. So it's a misnomer in one sense. What they do is, since there is a background noise and croaking in that noise is not a good sign. So Bornean species, what they do is they will do a pip kind of sound and then they stretch their hind limbs to show off to the female, and female get attracted with the look and the size of the leg and the reflectance of it, and then they mate. Whereas when it comes to the Western Ghat dancing frogs, I was initially thinking in the similar manner, but it all changed because none of those webbing have any reflectance. It's all brownish in color. And then also, uh, when one frog is croaking, there is another frog which is croaking. So there are males which are croaking together, and then they show off the leg, and finally they will actually kick each other. So we came to the conclusion that with our experimentation, the frog in the Western Ghats which does the dance is not for attracting the mate, it is for maintaining the territory. And the territory is small stone on which a frog will be moving its leg and saying that this is my territory, don't come near. And when the other male comes near, they will kick each other and then say, you move away from my territory, kind of. So that's a territorial behavior in the dancing frogs. We also try to see how the mapping of that entire stretching from the Bornean frog to the Western Ghats frog can happen. What is the androgen receptor level in that? Whether that is any triggering issue with the foot flagging to the cranial nervous system and all these things we have looked into. I can share those paper if you can write to me personally. There are many more interesting species. There are species which breed in the bamboo. That's another species we worked on. There are direct developing frogs. It will, in fact, if we go on, I can go on for another couple of hours talking about them. So these directly developing frogs are one of the most recently evolved species in the Western Ghats. So they avoid having a free tadpole in the water. What they do is they develop all the legs, hands, and all, and then they pop out of the jelly and become very tiny little froglet. There's no free living tadpole stage. They are called direct development, right? So why does that happen? Are they reducing their dependency on water? Are they seeing the climate change already, that reduced rainfall is going to happen and that's why they change? We have no answer for that. These are our very speculative way of looking at things, but these are very interesting species to look in future. So why that kind of direct development happened in this entire group? There are about 60 species of bush frogs. They have direct development. So wonderful question to look into, and these are very unique things that one can work on amphibians of India in general. Have read a story frog kissing and turning into prince.
The story of a frog and turning it into a prince. If you were to
It is personal experience. I can't tell anything about it. But as long as you are not icky about sliminess, it's fine, I believe. But in other sense, I would say don't do any of those things, because we are harbors of viruses now. We are harbors of bacteria. We don't know what we are transmitting into the frog world. So better not to handle any of the frogs. See them, take picture, and do with the picture whatever you want to do. Not with the real frogs, please.
Okay. Sobhapati is asking, how many frog species are there in northeast India?
Wonderful questions. Among 467 species, Western Ghats has about 260 plus. So remaining all from northeast and central part of India. That's about 200 plus species. About that ballpark number. Yeah.
Most likely many more to be discovered.
Many
Yes.
more to be described. Yeah, yeah.
Maria and the Nazareth, eating frog legs were a common delicacy in Goa. Frogs were caught
Yeah.
in the rice fields. Thankfully, this tradition has stopped.
Yes, yes, yes.
You
Thanks,
also
Mariani. Yeah. So this is what one of the instance happened 4 years ago when a couple of people were caught. Actually, what happens is just before the monsoon, all these frogs will turn into yellow, and that's another wonderful experiment to look at, because these are visual communications. So when they turn yellow, the female frog will be still brown. So all the males will be yellow, and it becomes easy for catchers also. So they will just go with the gunny bags and collect all of them, and then it get transported to either Goa or Kerala. Kerala also it's been eaten. So
You're talking about
luckily,
these
yeah,
are bullfrogs.
these are bullfrogs. Yeah, absolutely.
Very
These are
large.
bullfrogs. It's very large. Yeah, but the horrendous part is that it's not that the entire frog is eaten. It's only the legs that is being eaten. So it's a very horrendous way of treating an animal.
Do you have any idea on the frogs in the deserts of India?
Yes. So there are a couple of research that has happened in Rajasthan. I know a couple of researchers also over there. There are at least 8 species of frogs in those areas too. This is I'm talking from Jaipur and all. I have not gone to the deeper part of the desert area, but it's before the Aravallis kind of thing, or next to the Aravallis region. There are about 8 species are there.
So there are frogs in Rajasthan.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Buck is asking, what can happen if the frogs become completely extinct from our world? Does it lead to any socio-economic problem?
Yeah, wonderful question. I have no straightforward answer as of now, but if you can look into that Vancouver Zoo's poster, you will see that if the frog goes extinct, what perhaps will happen. So for that matter, any species going extinct, we may not realize the impact immediately. It will take a bit of time before we understand, right? It is something like one of the great example where aeroplane is flying and all the, I have forgotten the scientist name, the rivets are being removed one by one. You may not understand what is happening. You still feel comfortable. One rivet is gone, nothing is going to happen, kind of. But when you see that threshold level of rivets are removed, you are not in a plane anymore. That's it. So perhaps that is going to happen.
Yeah. And then it will be time to write a new hymn in the Rigveda.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think perhaps with that it is time to wrap it up. It has been a very rich conversation for me. I hope people who are watching also felt the same. Thank you very much, Dr. Guru Raja. And I think people can get in touch with you for more questions.
Sure.
I'm sure
Thank you,
many.
Kaustubh. It was a wonderful conversation with you. Thanks, Shashwat, for organizing this. Thank you very much.